Takeaway panel. My name is Joe Lombardo. I'm the editor of the LogiSYM magazine. And it's my pleasure to host the Takeaway panel with some eminent people. We have Azizi Nam Meo with us, the last speaker. We have also Dr. Marco Chikiman, who gave us the keynote speech. Thank you, Marco, for joining us. We have Stephanie Krishna, who managed the technology panel. And we have Dr. Ramon Krishna, who also managed the cold chain panel. Thank you all very much for staying back and going through this discussion. So it was a fascinating round-robin discussion about many, many different topics of the supply chain: technology, standards, cold chain, clusters, barriers, a number of provocative ideas in terms of localization, agricultural concepts, etc. But I'd like to come down to some synthesis, because Dr. Marco, if I can start with you, you talked about the clusters, the halal parks, which I believe is conceived as being the energizers of the halal supply chain, where you're creating some infrastructure, you're creating some clarity. And with your new Halal Park 2.0, you're adding more components to that. How do you think, having heard the different arguments in terms of the discussion on the technology, the complexity, and then we come to Mr. Aziz's presentation, where he put a very comprehensive architecture. But looking at all the obstacles, complexity, how do you think the clusters are driving through this myriad of obstacles?
Thank you, Joe. I think it's good to realize that with the halal supply chain, we make halal not necessarily easier. So I think as there are different market requirements, that the Saudi market requirements are very different from Indonesia and Malaysia, and we have to respect those different requirements. We need to simplify the halal ecosystem. And I have been proposing a new model to organize a halal park more comprehensive, so that it allows you to simplify halal, put the key players, a big part of the supply chain together. And Injik Azizi also suggests very practical, okay, let's do that in Malaysia. Senai has a great logistic infrastructure, key ports that are aware of halal logistics. Let's do it in a small scale and further expand it on there. So I think the halal ecosystem, the halal park, I think will be an important component of halal ecosystems in Malaysia and also in other parts of the world. And to simplify halal, to create also innovation and further develop those SMEs as well.
Yeah. So I think what we've been talking about, and everybody, each of you in your panels and also in your presentations, you are basically alluding to two major drivers. One is an industry transformation, where we're looking at infrastructure, we're looking at technology, looking at security, standards, etc. And then we're looking at the business models of the suppliers. Azizi, in your presentation, you made some very, very specific illustrations on this, but some of them are quite complex. If we want to start and make some impact on this, do you think there is an avenue to start the transformation and in parallel change the mindset of the suppliers, of the players in the market to meet and converge in something that is more sustainable and more practical? Because at this rate, it's going to take many, many more years. And having said that, the halal supply chain has made huge steps forward, but still a long way to go. What do you think about this complexity factor?
Well, there was at one point in time, I did a presentation to the Iskandar Halal Park, which is under the land, to use blockchain first cut, because I think the key thing in halal, before we go big, is the traceability. And I think I always worry, wherever I eat anything, even there's you have on the label, to show how reliable is the label. And now you have even QR code, you can go backward and look at provenance. So I think if it's confined within a park, you can control, you can put a lot of rules and regulations, right, particularly, in a halal park. And of course now there are other issues we need to bring in the halal ecosystem, things like sustainability, carbon footprint. All these things must be measured in, So everything can be put in the model in a park, And from there, you can bring it up to, you can replicate the park everywhere using the same model, put all those things. Then it's easy to because people will use that as the model to copy. And I think a lot of countries, even China, they're all interested. The thing is that somebody need to design the park in a way. I mean, I remember the Kalundborg template, the one in Denmark, the first eco park, so I think we need to move into that. We cannot wait and do part by part. Take into something big. Take a proper halal park. If you got one in Indonesia coming up, put in all those elements in there to become a model.
Sure.
So once you replicate everywhere, it's a bit easier.
But I come back to Dr. Mark on this point, because clearly we should do, we can do, we may do are all good statements. But when does the point change where we need to do and we've got to do it? When does that urgency start to trigger? Because if we put everything on offer, it will never be taken. People will not take it because maybe there isn't a sponsor of the problem to move us forward. Marco, what do you see as the buy-in in your project in the Halal Park 2, etc.?
I think the urgency, if you talk about the urgency, I think there are two components. So I think one is we have seen the halal crisis over the past years. We had the halal meat cartel scandal in Malaysia. Also other brand owners that saw their revenues and corporate reputation disappear. So I think on the brand owners is an important driver. But also as highlighted by Injik Azizi, but also Dr. Rashdi in the earlier discussion was the element of sustainability. So now everywhere in the world we have those UN Sustainable Development Goals being rolled out and put in regulation. From the halal point of view, I would like to share the Green Deen, the book written in 2010 already by Ibrahim Abdul Martin about how Islam teaches about how to protect the planet. In here it's written about protecting water, talking about energy from heaven, energy from hell, and also the aspect of waste. So I think from the sustainability aspect, I think that's the second urgency where we need to create a more inclusive halal ecosystem where, like in Indonesia, we also look at water management, for example, and sustainability. So I think that can be very well integrated in those halal park, and it is very well in line with also the Islamic teaching.
Sure. Thank you, Mark, for that.
Joe, if I could just add something there.
I was going to come to you. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Come to you.
Yeah, because, I mean, ultimately this is going to happen when the rubber hits the road, right? When it costs people money or they run the risk of losing money. We've heard two examples today. One was where a company was accused of being non-halal and not having halal practices, and it took them several months to prove that they were actually halal compliant, and they never recovered. And I think that was the chocolate factory example that we heard. Ultimately, if you invest technology, you're going to be able to recover from that faster and therefore minimize the damage that it's going to cause in the industry. Second is the next generation that is coming through. And while that may be a slower change, we're already starting to see demand around that. We're seeing similar impact from a sustainability perspective, where if you don't do it, you lose deals. Right. I was on a call last week with a semiconductor firm that's losing deals because they're not green enough. They're considered to be, greenwashing. So if you are not halal enough, I can see a similar aspect happening. The young people are going to demand it, and they're going to step up and do the technology that's going to drive it. In our conversation, we talked about having, young people that are technology focused actually putting together logistics companies and getting the right logistics knowledge, the right, religious knowledge in to help guide them through that journey. So I think there's going to be a number of factors that do help it, and it's going to be you compete or get out of the way, you do it or you lose money, or you comply or you will suffer the consequences. So ultimately it's going to be, you have to do it or you will not be able to move forward.
Steph, your panel was particularly interesting because you talked about the technology is there, the solutions are there, the expertise is there. The understanding is there, the costs are coming down rapidly, but yet there is not a take-up, there's no buy-in. And how can we increase the velocity of this buy-in of technology in the parks, in the model that Azizi was putting forward, to really get the buy-in? Because here we're talking about the icing on the cake, but the cake is still not ready to ice. How do we drive this forward?
Look, ultimately, we're seeing this in the industry as a whole. And if we start with manufacturers, we tend to be, manufacturing and logistics do tend to be slow when it comes to the uptake of technology. However, I think because of COVID, they're not going to survive unless they do. And I think similarly, we're going to see, implications of that as companies seek to remain competitive, to be able to maintain their space in the markets. When you have initiatives like was discussed on our panel, where you've got Pakistan investing in those sort of technologies so that they're able to put that traceability in place and then compete on a global scale, you're going to have no choice, right? Ultimately, at IDC, we're seeing that one of the main impetus for doing this is the increased competition. And this increased competition is not just coming from a local market, it's coming from international markets. So it's something that organizations need to pay attention to.
Yeah. Okay, I need to come back to another point, because localization of production was something that was quite strong in both panels, the cold chain panel and technology panel. And I think also Azizi mentioned this in his presentation. But the perception of local production grown in towers and hydroponics processes are still a bit skeptical. Azizi, how do you think we can break this myth that to say that if we grow vegetables and fruit in hydroponic sort of environments, it's safe, it's green, it's halal? How do we break this mindset that it's not going to the ground, etc., to achieve the goal of localization?
Well, I've personally done vertical farming or high-tech farming up in Cameron Highland, quite a big, sizable. I think the key thing is you must observe the standards. You see, when I started putting my product into the supermarket shelf, it was quite difficult in the sense, there are many established players. But what I did, I put emphasis on quality. This is GAP compliant. This is HACCP, a GMP factory, and they come and inspect. And within a year or two, I took over 65% of the supermarket share. I think the people are very conscious and concerned about the healthy thing. And there's a lot of shortcuts, in agriculture. If you would, I can tell you, I was a planter before. And again, coming back to your question, can I sidetrack a bit? One way to punish, even experienced player like even palm oil, is market access. You put your condition. You are not meeting this. For example, you are doing deforestation. You are not treating the workers well. You put that condition up. Then you will discipline people, because if you lose your market or your brand, you will be under a lot of pressure. Same thing, when I put in my quality, is part of my branding strategy, and you have to spend money, just to
the palm oil is a typical example, because it's very much land-based. It's Malaysia. But when you got suppliers from all over the place, you got a bigger ecosystem supply, you can't impose those because you start creating unfair competition. What other ways could there be that we can actually either compensate or penalize big brands? Because Marco said the brand owner should take the lead. But, the brand owners are also looking at the economic of scale. So, for example, you tell them, don't produce anymore in Timbuktu, start to produce in Malaysia or Singapore, or Thailand or Indonesia, where you can actually go to these new technologies. It's going to cost them more investment. It may cost them more in terms of fragmenting the scale, economies of scale. So what's the incentive? So how do we reconcile that? So, Ramon, if I can ask you, because looking at the big picture of giant supply chains, if I come to you as a big supplier, a big company, I say, Ramon, I want you now, for the sake of the green label and supply chain and halal, etc., can you fragment your supply chain, start breaking up your thing? You tell me, take a hike and ride. But what would make you happy if I came and give you some incentive?
Well, I think, Joe, I was listening to what Stephanie said, and I was listening to what Azizi said. Both very valid comments and arguments, yeah? But I also look at it from a slightly different perspective. If you want to talk about technology in your supply chain, you also need to consider, where do you want to sit in your market? Do you want to be a market follower, a leader, a laggard? And we've talked about this a couple of times. Off the top of my head, I can think of 3 multi-billion-dollar companies. One in the semicon space, the other one in medical technology, and the other one a wheel bearing. They make bearings, yeah. One Japanese and 2 American, multi-billion-dollar companies who just do not even have a warehouse management system. So you want to talk about technology in your supply chain? These are billion-dollar companies. They
Sure.
have very high investor returns on Wall Street, looking at the numbers just these past few days. And also talking about Azizi and around limiting market access. It's a slippery slope, yeah? We know, for example, in ASEAN, with non-tariff barriers, it's a very slippery slope. I think actually the onus is on the consumer, the customer, the one who buys from us.
Yeah.
So forget about where you want to be. Decide actually who you're serving and let your customer decide. And the onus then is on all the people on this symposium. If you think that you want to buy a more sustainable product, there's no greenwashing, there's consistency, put your money where your mouth is and pay for it. That's the only way it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think
But you know,
Kumal Gupta had a good quote there where he said the label has become more important than the food, right? If that's what you really believe, look at the label and invest accordingly. Yeah, I agree with that.
And Dr. Rusty also mentioned something very important. He said, he cited the cases why e-commerce applications were not so successful. He cited the cost of food being very sensitive. So there must be some equilibrium there, Azizi. In fact, how do you transition to a supply chain which is economical, it's compliant, it's in line with the standards and objectives, but how do we achieve that equilibrium? And what are the drivers to actually help us to move in that direction?
Azizi, you're on mute, Azizi.
You're on mute.
At the moment, most of the supply chain are not efficient. I think we've got efficiency problem first. There's a lot of losses, a lot of. I think we need to overcome that first. Once you overcome that, when you are really putting your your battle on the even keel. And the rest will be addition, will be your promotion, will be your branding. But if that fundamental is not resolved, there'll be leakages, there will be high rejects. I think it's not the right way to do. Because if you just look at the top alone, it won't be enough. You need to look at the underlying factors. So to me, I will strengthen the supply chain first. And I believe in that all the time. Even in agriculture, when I was transporting latex globally. During the time there was no computer, we were using telex machine. It was so efficient because we really look at the supply chain. We strengthen the supply chain. I think that is the fundamental.
I agree, Marco. The point was, I don't know whether you heard one of the speakers was saying, I think it was on Stephanie's panel, was saying that the standards today are more of a recommendation than a mandatory compliance. I'm not sure that's correct. Maybe you correct me. Clearly, if that's the case, then people are still going to take it as an invitation to comply, but not to apply. And if that's the case, isn't it then going to slow down the transformation of the industry to move faster to that migration process? What's your view on that?
There have been the existing halal standards, for example, they already made it mandatory to segregate halal in storage and transport. So that was already an existing standards, but it was not enforced by halal authorities. However, what I see is that halal goes towards supply chain and value chain. Value chain, we talk about also sustainability, Islamic banking, finance, Islamic branding. So enforcement, I think, will follow the standards, and there might be some delay in there, but it is certainly coming. And I think there is a lot of pressure on big brand owners that are not, they don't want to lose the license to operate. Like Indonesia is the largest halal market in the world. I mean, if you're a big brand owner, you don't want to lose market access to Indonesia. So I think those big brand owners will need to be proactive, and I'm working with big brand owners to prepare them on halal supply chain and halal value chain. So I think big brand owners will make sure they protect the license to operate, Governments will put regulations in place, I'm sure. So
Yeah.
you see that on halal, but also on sustainability. And
yeah. I thought it was one of the comments, I think it was Kunal Gupta that said that he perceived the halal label not as a halal segmentation, but as a health label that could promote. And this is makes a lot of sense from that point of view, because if it has certain compliances, protection, etc., it makes sense. Then why isn't there more buy-in from the wider industry to move in this direction? In which case, also governments may provide some subsidies or some incentives. As you say, Malaysia, Indonesia are big promoters of the Middle East. Is there an absence also from government investment buy into this model? Azizi, what do you think from this?
I'm not too sure. Like in Malaysia, the government doesn't. I mean, they give incentive. They don't really specify what exactly, unless we ask and with the right reason. But I agree with Marco earlier. We have all the standard in place. Enforcement is a big issue in this country.
Right.
I mean, if you look at halal logistics, there is no enforcement at all. I've not heard of any enforcement done unless it's a crisis. But at the slaughterhouse, you may have upstream. Those are the easier, convenient. When it comes to the logistics, it's a bit technical, I think. They may not have qualified people to enforce certain ruling. So that is the one aspect of it. Now, as far as the government is concerned, when I was the pioneer board member of HDC, all they want to see is that you build industry, create jobs, and so they don't go deeper than that. Even sometimes when we put our proposal for future expansion, sometimes they don't buy it. So that's always a problem. There are many things you wanted to do at HDC, but you were not allowed because there was no budget. Even though we know we're doing the right thing. So sometimes to depend on the government alone it can be a bit difficult.
Okay, Marco, can I ask you the same thing? I mean, have your clusters, have your halal parks energized change within the government community, or in some areas which are strongly sponsoring the change?
Definitely. So we work with our halal park in Indonesia, Modern Halal Valley. We work directly with local and national government. We do that hand in hand because governments, they are regulatory people, whereas we are from the industry. So we need to educate also government on what are the industry requirements and how do we need help? What kind of help do we need from government? It's not only money, but it can also be to simplify regulation or to strengthen regulation or enforcement, like in logistics, to make it more attractive for companies to work via halal park. So,
Okay, it's good. No, because clearly there is also a few comments made earlier on about education, about really educating correctly, not speculatively, what it's all about. But can I come back to technology, Steph? Because clearly we know blockchain is probably the ideal way to track and trace the food chain, but it's complex. Yeah. What is your alternative stepping stone moving forward to achieve a first level of technology embracement before we move to the more complex supply chain, which could be already be deployed by the big players, but not so much the small players? Where do you see that technology bridging coming in?
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, the platformification is going to be key. So the enablement of platforms that are going to be able to link this, and we're already seeing, I mean, Azizi mentioned, the as a service model, having that software as a service and being able to provide that connectivity. But when we talk about platforms, it's not just talking about one solution. It's about connectivity between organizations. Ramon talks about billion-dollar companies that are able to operate without, extensive technology, not using WMSs, etc. But where we're going to be able to have that connectivity and traceability between organizations and know where they're going to be bumps in the supply chain is going to happen from connectivity. So, what we're seeing is that ultimately a lot of companies do start by getting, ERP and financial systems in place. Then they're looking to things like transportation management systems as de facto supply chain orchestration tools. then they'll be looking to integrate that with WMS, and they may come in different orders depending on the priorities of the organizations. But ultimately, when putting these roadmaps together, it's looking at connectivity between the applications and being able to provide the bridge between different companies in the supply chain. It's all well and good to clean house in your own company, but to be able to make that connectivity to your first and second tier suppliers and customers is going to ultimately drive the traceability and value that you want to derive from this.
Right. Perfect.
I
Time
think
is running. Sorry, go ahead, Azizi.
No, I'm just thinking that one of the things that we need to do is to digitize the supply chain where you have gaps, where there are paper-based. For example, in the agriculture sector, plantation, everything is paper-based. Even now they're introducing a tablet, but then sometimes you don't have connectivity. You need to dock the tablet in the factory somewhere, to download or upload the information. So I think that first part is to bridge the gap through digitalization where there is a gap. Once you have done that, it's a bit easier to do blockchain or any other thing. That part, we need to do first.
Yeah. So time is running short, and I've been asking each of you for your takeaway statement. But before that, I want to ask Ramon from a business point of view. So, Ramon, you are now in the a supplier, small supplier in the space, an SME supplier. What would you want as support from Marco or from Azizi or from anybody to help you not only survive in your sector, but build and grow your market share using your technology, but also elevating your share in the halal supply chain as a supplier?
No, I think actually what Azizi and Marco is doing exactly what they should be doing is by platforms like this, at a symposium like this, sharing that knowledge and information that's available out there. I mean, if you look at the participation here, the numbers speak for themselves. Yeah, people are interested in hearing how they can do better. So it's our job to actually go out there and build that awareness. But I also go back to my original point. People need to pay to play. You need to put your money where your mouth is. And unfortunately, when you talk about sustainable products, when you talk about better manufactured products, better certification, this comes at a cost. So you as a consumer need to decide that you're willing to pay for it.
Sure.
And Azizi, and you actually asked the question, Joe, the role that governments need to play, yeah? Unfortunately, governments are so busy now with COVID-19, regardless of where you are anywhere in the world.
Yeah, sure.
But governments have a very important part to play in this.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And that can be sort of governments as well. But they do have to, for the sake of their populace, raise the standard. And then if you want to go into a larger arena, look at it from an ASEAN perspective, look at it from a WTO perspective.
Yeah, so, absolutely right. But the reality is that the costs are rising, the complexity is rising, and there needs to be a lot more education and a lot more explanation of what's going on. Even technology, there's so much variation of what technologies that even people who are half savvy on technology can still be confused. Great discussion. Unfortunately, time is running, so I'm going to ask each of you to give me your takeaway message from this discussion. What do we need to do to move forward? So I'd like to start with Marco first, just to summarize, what are the takeaways, the message you want to leave our audience, our participants, in terms of your message?
Thank you, Joe. So I found it a very interesting discussions we had. I think during this COVID times, I think the halal industry and I think the halal supply chain sector, I think there are a lot of opportunities. So I think I would like to end my takeaway as I think look at the opportunities I think the halal industry gives. Look also at sustainability. So include sustainability in halal, I think is an important one, because if you like it or not, there will be a lot of government regulations coming in every country on sustainability. So pick it up and be proactive on halal and sustainability, to be a first mover instead of a follower. So that would be my takeaway. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Steph, could I ask you for your takeaway?
Thanks, Joe. For me, it's remembering that information can often be more important than the inventory. right? So the information that goes along with the product is actually just as important as, or in a lot of cases, more important than the product itself. And the reason I say that is because, you know, even not considering halal, organizations are looking to use buffer stocks and this sort of, you know, increased expenses in order to build in the resilience that they need in the supply chain to deal with the disruption that's happening at the moment. Issues with traceability, issues with disruptions, not being able to have that visibility in the supply chain. All of these are reasons to get a handle on your information in the supply chain. Add the halal dimension, you know, and I think that there's a lot, you know, a lot to be said about, you know, reading the label and being aware of the information that's happening in your product and in the history of your product. Yeah, so in general, I would say, you know, read the label. And look at the information that behind it, and then enable the information behind it, and make sure that you're buying based on it, because that's what's going to drive change in the supply chain.
Interesting. Thanks, Stephanie. Azizi, your takeaway, please.
Well, when I did this, a little bit of research on the project, or the paper that I presented, there's not much information on halal. You know? Not much work been done, and a lot of it done in Malaysia, but it's purely from the university. And you know, there are no other reference that I could get, you know. Therefore, there was no emphasis on the importance of halal in terms of getting data. So that is something I wish that the producing countries and the consuming countries, they can get together and, you know, exchange data, because most of the producing countries are non-Muslim, the bulk of it, and the consuming countries are Muslim, you know, and I think there must be a way they need to talk to each other to, you know, to get things right, you know, to set the, you know, to set the standards, so that common standards, so that, you know, there'll be less trade friction and there'll be better clarity in terms of parliament integrity. That's my take.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Ramon. You're last in the line, but not least.
3 points, Joe. One is listen and learn. Yeah? So platforms like LogiSYM and its partnership with MIFB are a great opportunity for us to listen and learn out, you know, of what's out there. And I'm going to steal something that Marco said earlier in his keynote. Don't create unnecessary complexity, right? We do need to digitalize. We do need to have that visibility, that track and trace. But, you know, do you need blockchain technology when maybe just a barcode will do? So first thing, listen and learn. Secondly, to the consumers out there, and all of us are consumers, you need to pay to play. It cannot very rarely be good and cheap, right? So if you want that quality, if you want to have a sustainable product or be a sustainable consumer, be willing to pay for it, unfortunately. And third and lastly is that the opportunity is out there. I said this in my opening remarks. You know, COVID-19 has presented a lot of challenges to everyone, but at the same time, you can also see companies that are doing very, very well out there. Why? Because they've leveraged and tipped this on the side and taken COVID-19 as an opportunity to learn, to do something different, to reinvent the supply chains, and come out ahead of the competition. So listen and learn, pay to play, and seize the opportunities when they come there.
Great. Stephanie, Azizi, Marco, Ramon, thank you so much for making this takeaway panel so exciting and summarizing a lot of the key points. A lot more to discuss, a lot more work to be done. I'd like to thank all those other speakers and panelists who joined us for this event today, including Dr. Rushdie, who I think woke up about, 3 o'clock in the morning, New York time, to join us, which really, really, really much appreciate that. I'm sorry he couldn't be with us also for the takeaway panel. I'd like to thank all the participants and delegates who joined us on this event. I hope that you found it useful. I hope you found it interesting. And I hope that the takeaways really sparks off some inspiration to get you moving forward, to learn more about the subject, take more interest in the sustainability factor, and really start engaging in the realities of our world. The completely changes in the new normal and everything else that's going on around us are part of this journey. So thank you all very much. Stay well, take care, and all the very best wishes to all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.